Quick update on the novel situation for the, I don't know, 12, 15 of you who care about it. I did get another rejection. Not unusual to get a rejection, but I got a personalized rejection today, which is a rare beast. I've actually not received a personalized rejection even to a request for pages since probably 2017 or 18. This was just to the initial query, which I haven't gotten a personalized rejection to one of those in a really long time, probably since I first started doing this almost a decade ago. So we're going to talk about that for a moment. But first, I want to flash my stats up because I've gotten a lot of rejections since that last video, and it's really, really not looking good for me right now. So the conventional wisdom in this space is that a manuscript that is likely to actually be published, to make it through the entire long process and become a novel at some point, to get to that level, you need at least a 10% request rate. My opinion is that's very low. I've heard some people give ridiculous, like you should expect a 75 or 80% request rate. That's stupid. It's clickbait nonsense. But when I look at people who have actually been accepted, have made it through the process, have novels in print, the actual number, the actual request rate seems to be closer to about 20%. But let's even go with 10% because I'm not even hitting that right now. I am at one request and 29 rejections, which needless to say is less than 10%. It's actually even worse than it looks because of those outstanding queries, a lot of them, about 35, so maybe approximately half of them, are from people who habitually do not respond. So they only ask to see pages if they want to see it. Otherwise, they just blow you off. They ghost you. And there's an ever larger proportion of people who do this in the industry. It's just becoming more and more common to just blow people off. And I am selectively picking people who do respond because I'm trying to get some information out of these people. You know that like business expert trope about how you learn more from failures than from success? Yeah, it's horseshit because I don't learn anything from failing if all I'm being told over and over again is thanks, no thanks. I'm getting no feedback. But today, for the first time in many, many years, I got feedback, and what I've received isn't making me feel great. So the rejection I got was brief, but it was actually personalized. And a lot of agents these days have form rejections that are meant to look personalized using that kind of time-tested astrology technique of making it sound like it's specific to you, but it's really not. This guy actually was giving me his feedback. It was very brief, but what it came down to was he did not think that he could represent a novel where the main character is a musician, which, by the way, is hint number 3 about what this novel is about. Maybe you can start putting some pieces together if you've watched the last 2 parts. What I'd like to do is advance kind of a working hypothesis I've had about agents and ultimately the entire industry for a while, which is that I don't think queries matter as much as people say. There's this like reflexive insistence anytime you have a bad submission round, anytime you don't do that well, to just insist, well, it's because you had a bad query. If you had a better query, you would have done better. It's kind of like on YouTube where everybody, if you aren't doing as well as you thought, everybody says bad thumbnails without even doing any analysis. That's just the assumption. Well, the assumption when you are shopping around a novel is it's a bad query. But I've always had this working hypothesis that the query doesn't really matter. I think there is such a thing as a bad query, but there is no such thing as a good query, because my hypothesis has always been that agents are choosing to represent or not represent work based on concept. It's a conceptual level thing. To put that into the parlance of our times, they're doing a vibe check. If the vibes are good, they'll ask for pages. If the vibes are really good, they'll choose to make an offer. But if the vibes are not so good, they just blow you off. And that's kind of how I've always assumed if things work. If I am correct on this point, then what that means is there is such a thing as a bad query, because it's possible you could have an idea, a concept that would sell at that moment in time, but the way you have formed the query obscures that. Maybe it's too long, it's too verbose, it's too confusing, you're burying the lead, you're describing the wrong things, you're focusing on the wrong things, and the agent doesn't notice it. But if you have an idea that's not going to work, then a good query isn't going to save that, because even if you get requests, they're just going to get rejected. This also means, by the way, if I'm right, that as a writer, before you have even touched pen to paper, before you have written one single word, before you have even planned your first word, you've already been rejected. You've already lost the war before the first battle has even begun. I believe that I am starting to see evidence that upholds this. And one of the biggest points has to do with the material you're now asked to provide. These days, agents and really published industry people in general use a lot of language from Hollywood, from film and TV production, because of course they do, because that's all roads lead to Hollywood these days. That's where everything is going. All the traffic is going there, and then it comes from there out to everywhere else. If you don't believe me, just check out all the people who are still obsessed over the Fallout TV series and how big a deal that was, and how now Fallout 76 is no longer considered a failure because of the increase in interest just from that show. Television and film, especially with all of these niche shows coming out on all these streaming services, is a really, really big deal. So I am not necessarily shocked to see people in the published industry start to adopt the terminology of Hollywood. They're starting to talk about things like elevator pitches, and log lines are now a part of your submission package. Now, in Hollywood, a lot of that is concept driven. You can pitch a script that you haven't written yet based just on the idea. You can corner some executive and just run it by him to see, is this an idea you would be interested in? And they will give you a yes or a no. Now, if they give you a yes, it's not a guarantee, but at least you have some idea that this person will look at a script if you write it. But the publishing industry doesn't work that way. As much as they are now demanding things like log lines, like it's not enough you have to describe your entire novel in one page, you have to describe it in 30 words or less. But the problem is you can't pitch a work based just on the idea. You have to have the entire manuscript, even if it was doomed from the start. And it's a really shitty situation if you have to do that. You're wasting all of this time on something that could end up being absolutely futile in the long term. Now, my evidence here, mainly at this point, just comes down to one thing, which is that when you look around at advice for things like query letters, these days, there's a lot more focus on those log lines, those film and TV style log lines. And there is even an insistence, and I have seen this from the agents themselves, so this isn't just like weirdos writing on Medium or whatever else just saying these things, that they want high concept log lines, which means they want to see the entire novel described in a single sentence, the whole thing, the whole idea, which by its very nature means that they are expecting to see high concept plots. I don't know that I have written a high concept plot, but even if I have, even if I have not, it kind of doesn't matter, because the fact that they're asking for that to me confirms something I've believed for many years, which is that they are basing all of these on the idea. They are basing all of these on a vibe check, and I am just not exuding good vibes on anything that I do. My work isn't archetypical enough to be considered commercial, but my prose isn't fancy enough to be lit fic. So I'm in this nether space in between where I just can't get anyone to pay attention to me. Now, my response to this has not been to quit yet. It's very early to do that when there's a lot more people I could pester about this, but it has sort of changed the way I approach the query process. So I've already mentioned query 5, which was terrible, which read like it was written by a concussed child. I did a 6th query that was the same basic structure, except slightly modified so it looked like it was written by an adult. And just before I recorded this, I wrote and sent out just a few of a 7th query, and this one is deranged. It's not objectively weird. If I showed you this query right now, you probably would not understand why I'm talking this way. But the reason I say that it's deranged is because it is barely about the novel at all. At this point, it is just a marketing letter where I start off by explaining why it is that I think something like the novel could be sold without ever mentioning the novel, ever even mentioning that that is what I am pitching. I am just describing the media environment. I am describing the culture I see in the kids I work with. And then in the second paragraph, then I mention that I have a novel. I barely describe the novel. It's barely in here. It is pure marketing, because I think at this point that is 100% what we're dealing with, is I am having to approach these people as a marketer because that is how they think. They don't think as readers. They don't think as people appreciating art. They think about this for its commercial value. And I need to prove to them by showing them all these trend lines, all of these things that are popular on Instagram, all these things that are getting a lot of exposure on Netflix series, that I have written something that people are interested in. And that's just where we are, as a culture. Not really expecting this query will work, but the secret of it is doing the quote unquote correct query resulted in me getting 0% request rate for many years. So I figure, what the hell? Let's see if this works. So we'll see if it works. And I don't know, I'll probably be writing in to complain about this again in a week. So I guess I'll see you then.